Okay, so everything from this moment forward is recorded. Welcome everyone who's watching the replay to Lunar Nodes and Eclipses, the Measurable and the Mythical. I'm also going to enable the closed captioning just in case anybody likes to work with that. So just turn that on. I think you just have to optimize it on your end. Live transcript, enable. Okay, wonderful. And so for anybody who has not taken a class or any kind of workshop with me before, I just want to let you know a little bit about how we like to use, or I like to use time. I will be, and Alyssa will be lecturing, right? We have a beautiful slideshow to share with you and show you all of this really interesting information about lunar eclipses, or the lunar nodes and eclipses. And I will be pausing throughout for Q&A. So if you have a question, if something comes up and it's pressing, please feel free to drop it into the chat box. In the webinar format, there is apparently also a Q&A box that I just learned about this morning. So if you feel called to use that function, really however you like to facilitate this for yourself is cool with me. So drop your questions in there, and then we'll be tending to those questions as we move through, making it so that there is an ample flow between lecture and conversation with you all. And I believe that, what else can I tell you? I think that we're going to run about, an hour and 30. That's kind of my game plan for today. And we're going to move through this kind of cerebral presentation. And then Alyssa is going to be kind of winding us down with a guided visualization, which she is really wonderful at. Alyssa is also a yoga instructor and breathwork facilitator. So lots of trust and gratitude for that offering at the end. And do stick around for the end of the show if you have time. Sounds so corny to say, because we have a little gift for you for being here with us today. Okay, fab. So I'm going to get us started. Thank you, everyone, and let's jump in. So here's our path together this afternoon. I always love a good table of contents redux. So we're going to be thinking about our current cosmos right now, situating ourselves into the environment of the current sky. We're going to be thinking a lot about what the luminaries mean in general. What is the role of the sun and the moon, and why are they so important to us in terms of eclipse work? I'm going to be talking about the meaning of eclipses in the ancient imagination and kind of touching in on why we have some of the beliefs that we have about eclipses that we do today. Alyssa will be guiding us through really awesome astronomical insight regarding the ecliptic and the nodes of the moon and the motion of the cosmos in general, kind of situating us into the astronomical Earth-sky relationship, which I personally find so important and so refreshing as an astrology kind of approach. I think we need a lot more of that in our conversations. We're going to talk about types of eclipses, the duality of Taurus-Scorpio, and then finally, last but not least, how to work with this eclipse series and how to sort of understand the way that it is impacting you personally. And so this is going to be where you get that sort of juicy takeaway of, oh, I see how this is impacting me in my own life. And then we'll close out with our guided visualization / meditation. So as a matter of getting ourselves started, let's take a look at our current sky just to orient ourselves to where we're at before we jump in with all of this big esoteric kind of insight. So I've got here on this slide the chart of the moment of this class opening up, 12 p.m. PST here in Oregon on this day. And so we can see that, the sky is very busy. Tons of Pisces energy still in the collective, in the cosmos right now. But what we are focusing on today is the motion of the sun, the moon, and the nodes in their relationship together. And so just to orient us, we see that the sun is here in Taurus, kind of inching ever closer to the North Node, which is also in Taurus. And the moon is here in Aquarius. And this is the moon in its waning formation. We are moving to a new moon as the moon reaches to connect with the sun on April 30th. We're going to have our first eclipse at the end of this week on the 30th at 10 degrees Taurus. And so just to kind of show you what we're looking for, we are really focusing on the north and south node in Taurus and Scorpio and the way that the sun and moon are oriented towards them today, right? So just a kind of interesting place to be dropping in. We're closing this lunar cycle moment. The moon is actually square to the nodes today, which I absolutely did not plan. The moon is also conjunct the fixed star Deneb Algeti, in case anybody is a fixed star nerd. And so that's fortuitous for us getting together on this day as well. So let's kind of keep unraveling what it really means to be in the grips of eclipse season and what an eclipse even is, because I think that warrants some defining. Right, an eclipse is, as I've written here, an astronomical event that occurs when an astronomical object or spacecraft, I like that in this definition, is temporarily obscured by passing into the shadow of another body or by having another body pass between it and the viewer. This alignment of three celestial objects is known as a syzygy. And so when we get into the astronomical meaning of things, Alyssa is really going to be breaking this down beautifully. But I just think that it's important to say what an eclipse is and why we care. Eclipses, generally speaking, happen 4 times per year. Sometimes there are more eclipses than that. Sometimes there's slightly fewer. But regardless of how many, eclipses happen in pairings because they happen around the north and south node, which is a binary pair in the cosmos of energetic points, right? And so eclipses are noted when we have a full moon or a new moon near to the north and south node. It's very simple. That's it. Like, that's the secret of it. We know that it's an eclipse when we have a lunation proximal to the north or south node, or both if it's a full moon. And thinking about what the north and south node are, mathematically, they are these derived points that we calculate by the relationship between the sun, the moon, and the earth. And the nodes are just, these invisible points in the cosmos that definitely give us an indicator of a path of fate or a path of destiny, at least in the natal chart. In the collective chart, it is this kind of area of activation for us in the general public, what we are all moving through on a sort of karmic level. And so the nodes of the moon are always transiting retrograde, almost always. They move backwards over space while most planets move forward, which I always find very interesting because we have this idea that fate is kind of like reaching us backward into this backward arc while the planets are relatively forward moving except for retrograde. And so it's just this very poetic sort of thing that we're simultaneously reaching back into the old while moving forward into the new to find our path forward. The ancients referred to eclipses as times of great beginnings and great endings. And so, for all of the maybe eclipse hype that you find online or things that are kind of clickbaity about the like magical or scariness of an eclipse, I would say table that and reframe it in your mind or your imagination as eclipses bringing great beginnings and great endings. So it's just going to be true that the eclipses will be activating a particular set of houses in your natal chart, which we'll show you how to figure out. And you'll be activated in that sector of your chart and in your life for about a year and a half at a given point in time. So we'll be deepening an understanding of what all of that means today, right? So I think that is what we can say just on a very basic definition level of eclipses. Let's think now about the sun and the moon as our life givers. As you know, from living here on planet Earth, we don't know how to mark a day without the sun, and we don't mark the evening without the moon. Maybe sometimes we see the moon less because we're sleeping or it's cloudy, but we know that the rise and set of these two planetary bodies, these two luminaries, are foundational to our circadian rhythms, to how we figure out how to live in this world. And they're really important in astrology as well, right? So astrologically, the sun and the moon are just the core foundational components of how we determine what a person is destined to be or how they function. Every planet in the chart is important, but we would be nothing without our sun and without our moon. Literal makers of day and night, always linked in this kind of oppositional relationship in terms of their meanings. The sun, of course, talking about themes of centrality, identity, ego formation. The moon talking about our emotional core, what we need in order to feel nurtured, intuition, dreaming, memory, the body, right? We have this kind of split between like logos and emotion, or the mind and the body, the kind of rational and the corporeal. That's what our sun and moon bring to us in terms of their responsibilities astrologically. And really, these are just, again, so foundational. And so this is why in eclipse time, we think of things as extra special or maybe extra fraught or extra pressurized because the sun and the moon are being interfered with in terms of their celestial light. But more on that in a minute. I love this quote here from Richard Tarnas talking about the sun. And I think that it helps us understand on a maybe keyword level about this luminary. And this comes from his book, Cosmos and Psyche, which is just so excellent if anyone has not tried to read that before. I feel like that's one of those books that takes like probably over at least a year to really read and be like present with. Yeah. So I'm going to read you this quote. So Tarnas writes, "The sun is the central principle of vital creative energy, the will to exist, the impulse and capacity to be, to manifest, to be active, central, to radiate, and to shine. The seat of the mind and the spirit, the animus, the executive functions of the self or ego, the centrifugal expression of self." I love that phrase. The trajectory of self-manifestation, ascent and descent, and the solar hero. And so that all is pretty important in terms of how we put together a person and also a view of our world. The sun is just about the concept of centrality, and we'll see that come up in these solar myths that we talk about in just a few slides. But I'd love to pass this over to Alyssa at this time, just to talk a little bit more about these bodies and their relationship to the earth.
I love that quote also. That's one of my favorites. And I think it's really beautiful just to reiterate that ancient astronomers did not see the planets as lifeless abstractions. The wandering stars, in fact, were gods and goddesses, right, displaced into the heavens, and they were experienced through myth, through ceremony, through worship. And I say this a lot when discussing my own ritual practice, which is just that if I'm going to worship anything at all, how could it not be the sun and moon? And amazing coincidences that lead us to this, right? With the sun being approximately 108 solar diameters away from Earth, and the moon also being 108 solar or lunar diameters away from Earth, and appearing to be the same size in our skies. Like, how could that be? And it's, again, this like number magic and sacred geometry that we bring in, where though the sun is 400 times larger than the moon, it is also 400 times further away, which allows this, which is incredible. And some more number magic on the next slide, where we see these numbers, if we bring them together as we do in numerology, adding 400 and 108 brings us 508. 508 is 13, and there are 13 lunations in one solar year. So that's kind of interesting. And just some information on the right side here, that until the moon reached this 108 distance. And this is a sacred number for us in the practice of yoga philosophy and in the Vedic scriptures, where we see 108, right? 108 mala beads. And there are so many amazing, beautiful synchronicities with this number, but this is what allows life on Earth. So not simply, again, an abstraction, but truly something that supports our very existence. And I think you'll take us a little bit deeper into some of the basic principles of these luminaries.
Yeah, I will. And that is just so incredible. I didn't think about the yoga connection and like the mala bead 108, which I totally knew, but did not connect the dots at all. So yeah, this is why having like a multifaceted, I guess, approach to our practices is so enriching, because that just makes it feel and seem even more relevant that there is this kind of sacred geometrical numerical thing going on. So thank you for that. That's awesome. Okay, wonderful. So to just keep moving a little bit further into our conversation, I want to talk about myths that are affiliated with the sun and the moon. And so, right, when we're practicing tropical Western astrology, I'm a person based in the United States with Italian ancestry. And so my practice is influenced by the Greco-Roman. The planets in our astrology charts are all named after the gods of Roman antiquity as well. And so thinking about the kind of connections between the planets and the myths, for me personally in my work, as I'm sure a lot of you know, like it's very important and is kind of a guiding light in my own framework of astrology. And I don't think I'm unique in that, but it's just like my pet project. So to kind of understand deeper what the sun kind of brings to us, I want to talk about the mythic kind of figures that are associated with the sun in the Greco-Roman canon. So, first and foremost, when we think about the sun from the Greek perspective, we have the god Helios, who was supposed to ride his like golden chariot through the sky each day. He had horses with tails and manes of fire, and he was just the day marker. There are not a lot of crazy stories about Helios as a figure. He did have like a herd of cows that was violated by some of the solar heroes, and he was pissed about that. But he's not a typical mythic figure who really engages in an embodied way. He is really more of a distant, remote daymaker in the writing. But a little bit later into history, we have the emergence of the god Apollo, who was extremely important and kind of took over that solar mythic place in the imaginary, kind of usurping Helios in terms of focus of the sun. There's a lot of uncertainty about Apollo's historical origins, which I find interesting because he's like so central, but some scholars think he came from an Eastern mythos. Perhaps he was a Hittite god coming from like, what is modern day Turkey, perhaps. He may have been a Greek double of the Arab god Hobal, or he might have been a Nordic divinity brought to the Greeks from the north in the course of their migrations, because sometimes he's referred to as the Hyperborean, which is just like the northern one. Regardless, he's a solar god, without, of course, being the sun himself. And so he's associated with the burning light of the sun, which could kill with its heat, but give life with its warmth. He was figured as an archer. He was very strong. And just as the sun can heal, he is an early god of medicine. He is the father of Asclepius, the famous mythic healer, and the adopted father of Chiron, the mythic healer centaur. He's also associated with music and like the pastoral, being the leader of the 9 muses. He almost always has either a lyre or this kind of like ray of light over his head in artistic depictions of him. And the reason why I'm kind of lingering on him is that he was like the main guy besides Jupiter. He was really the sort of main masculine figure in mythos, many temples to him, very venerated deity who was relied upon heavily in the ancient mythic world, just like we rely on the sun very heavily in our day-to-day life. And so when we're thinking about the sun and its importance in eclipses, we're kind of thinking about not only this centralizing astrological entity, but the god that gives medicine, strength, artistic softness, brilliance, vision, all of these things that are so important for us to feel like we're here. And so on the other side of things, right, if we have day, we must have night. We can think about myths of the moon. And so Demetra George writes in her book, The Asteroid Goddesses, the silver light of the moon reflects the ground of lunar energy, the undifferentiated feminine prior to manifestation, and her powers of fertilization and transformation, right? So the moon being this primary symbol of the feminine polarity in the masculine feminine binary, personified in the ancient world as the goddess. The moon in her phases of waxing and waning symbolizes many goddesses that represent various facets of her changing face, most famously figured as like the divine feminine trio, maiden, mother, and crone. Demetra George states that there are two principles of feminine power. The first is growth and fertilization, which is observed in women's rhythmic connection to the moon's cycles. And the second being that of transformation, as women transform their blood, their body, into milk that sustains life when they're breastfeeding their children, right? So the moon is as important as the sun. And so, in terms of the mythos of the moon, we know that even before we had important myths of patriarchal sun gods, we had very important myths of the moon in her form as the great goddess, just singular, or then later the triple goddess, right? So the moon is the entity that marks this realm of night, which brings up ideas of interiority, darkness, and connection to something ancestral and ancient. Thinking about Diana as the maiden, Selene or Ceres as the mother, and Hecate as the crone formation. I'm sure these are names that are familiar to you all, but when we're thinking about the sun and the moon, we cannot forget their mythic origins, because it's not just enough to know that in astrology, the sun is about your ego and the moon is about your feelings. We want to reach deeper into what the sort of archetypal or imaginative or spiritual kind of approach would have been to these luminaries. Like, as Alyssa said at the beginning, if you're going to worship something, why not have it be the sun and the moon? And so, you can remain as secular as you like, but I tend to agree that nature is the thing that we should worship. And thinking about the importance of these luminaries here, let's, get back into the place where we're understanding where people were thinking about these, or how they were thinking about these bodies, right? And so, just to kind of bring us into a moment where we are aware of how important the sun and the moon are in the ancient imagination, right, as these displaced wandering god figures. I'm going to just like guide you through just like something to imagine. You can close your eyes if you want to, you don't have to, but if you close your eyes and just kind of imagine that you are living in some ancient rural area, right? It is nighttime. You are out on a walk. Maybe you're out with your lover or with someone who's really important to you, and the moon is rising over the horizon. The sky is brilliant, right? The night has that silver look to it that gets when the moon is full. And it just seems so peaceful and so serene. But as you continue to walk and gaze at the moon, it slowly turns the color of blood. The moon is being eclipsed, a shadow is falling across her face, and just the absolute confusion or fear or dismay at seeing these silver moons stained with this rust blood color had to have been quite jarring, I would imagine. And so if you can kind of take that into your own imagination, into your body, what does it feel like when something that we rely on so deeply is disturbed, right? Or tampered with. And so before we were able to predict eclipses effectively, eclipses probably seemed quite random to people. And if the sun is the giver of life in the daytime and the moon is that feminine life giver of the evening, to have their light tampered with just seemed to be like the original bad omen, right? It's just everywhere, to think about how vital these luminaries are and to have them be sort of like blinking or flickering, right? We think of the fixed star Algol actually as malefic because the ancients noticed that the star itself blinks because other matter is orbiting it. It's not her fault. But there is this kind of sympathetic magic between the constancy of light and the idea of goodness or rightness. And so eclipses just in the ancient imagination with the sun and the moon obscured showed us that that was a moment of having to surrender to something unexpected and definitely a time where things felt a bit uncomfortable, right? And so to kind of wind us through this, wind us down, eclipses have figured themselves into the creative imaginary as a result of their like the shared knowledge that they're quite important and perhaps a bit challenging. So I love these two different quotes from two different Shakespeare works, which reflects the prevailing beliefs that eclipses were bad omens, right? From King Lear, these late eclipses in the sun and moon portend no good to us. Through the wisdom of nature, though the wisdom of nature can reason it thus and thus, yet nature finds itself scourged by the sequent effects. And if you haven't read King Lear, that's definitely a play about lunacy and having your sense of reality perturbed and disturbed. And so if, Gloucester is saying that the eclipses are bringing these bad portents, right? It's not going to look good for Lear. And then from this sonnet, no more to be grieved at that which thou hast done. Roses have thorns and silver fountains mud. Clouds and eclipses stain both moon and sun, and loathsome canker lives in sweetest bud. And so I think that this is just speaking to the consistency or the ever-present nature of something, like eclipses that does kind of stain the beauty of something that is supposed to be sweet, like roses or flower buds or clouds. And so, yeah, if you look around in a lot of literature, you'll find references to eclipses as these sort of challenging, to be avoided events in the cosmos. And so I'm going to now turn myself over to Alyssa for a few moments, but I actually want to just pause here and check in and see if anybody has any questions or any comments that they'd like to drop into the chat before I push forward. I'll give it a second too. I know it's a little slow.
I'm also not sure if participants or attendees need to set the chat to everyone rather than that just might be something also that's blocking anything from incoming.
Cool. I think people are in it. I think it's okay, but thank you for that. Yeah, learning as we're going here with the Zoom webinars. Okay, lovely. So it seems like people are just vibing, which is cool.
Yes.
Let's move on. So Alyssa, I'm going to let you jump in here.
Okay. So normally in a ceremonial astronomy class or an earth astrology class, we do begin with the sun. However, for our purposes today and this deep lunar focus, we are starting with the moon. And the mention of Diana and Apollo references the fact that the bow of the moon and the curvature of her illuminated side will always point us towards the sun. So when you see the waxing crescent, or you see the first quarter moon, the curve of her bow will always point you in the direction of sunset, or where the sun is below the horizon. And this is a story that my friend and astro partner, Gemini Brett, has told many times and loves to tell, of Diana aiding her mother, Latona, in delivering her brother, Apollo, while they are on the run. And this astronomical truth is a wondrous nod to the myth, showing her, or showing us, where he is. And I won't go any further, as that is not my expertise, but just another wonderful coincidence.
Awesome. I love that so much.
Either way, it's so good. Either way, the moon shows us where the sun is, and every month we have a new moon between sun and earth. And if you look to the sunset sky, you'll see the waxing crescent emerge over the period of 2 weeks or so, right? And then we have full moon, moon and sun opposing one another in our skies, and moon circles earth to come around again for another new moon. And this is a synodic month, which is new moon to new moon, as opposed to sidereal month, which maybe some people have heard. And the sidereal month is slightly different. It's about 2 days less, and that would be moon against the backdrop of the fixed stars. So of course, we know every month we have a changing new moon in Aries, new moon in Taurus. New moon is not returning to the same zodiacal realm. So we're looking at the synodic month, just looking at new moon to new moon. And this happens about 13 times per solar year, as said earlier, with some of that number magic. And if you've heard that a new moon will bring a solar eclipse, then you might be wondering why we don't have solar eclipses every month, and why that only occurs about twice a year. So astronomers and astrologers alike use this term syzygy, as Cristina defined earlier, an alignment of 3 celestial objects. And I wonder if maybe we should reserve the term strictly for eclipses, and some do, but why? And it looks like an alignment in the chart, right? This is the chart wheel from the new moon of the current lunar cycle that we're in. And it looks like all is well and good until we look at this bottom image of the same moment in time. And it looks like the moon is not necessarily aligned with sun and earth, but appearing slightly below. Well, lunar latitude will help us understand why. So we're going to look at the same moment from a different perspective. And there's a lot to unpack here. So let's review and get our footing first. So we're looking at the chart wheel of the April 1st new moon. That's at 11 degrees and 30 arc minutes of tropical Aries. And we see the image behind the chart wheel thanks to Stellarium software, which shows us the same new moon configuration, plus a few additional things. We have the green line, you see the meridian, as well as the yellow circle, which is the ecliptic, the apparent path of the sun. And we have the lunar orbit, which is the circle I have set to purple to honor Luna. Okay, so the ecliptic is really the orbital path of the Earth around the sun. However, we speak from a geocentric perspective. We speak from an Earth-centered perspective. And so it is viewed as the sun's annual path in our skies. So if the astronomers want to argue with you, we can talk about how we use the same references. We say things like sunrise and sunset, right? Those are geocentric perspectives. So we also see the degree markings along this circle, and these are degrees of celestial longitude. This is how we measure celestial bodies as they move counterclockwise along the ecliptic. And we see that in the chart as well, right? We see the primary motion, which is sunrise to sunset. And when that happens, the entire wheel moves, right? Aries rises, culminates, and then sets. However, when we look at secondary motion, we're looking at the motion of the sun from 0 degrees celestial longitude, which is 0 degrees tropical Aries, to 30 degrees celestial longitude, which is 0 degrees tropical Taurus. and so on and so forth. And it's really interesting to note that this is what our zodiac is aligned to. This first point of Aries, 0 degrees celestial longitude. This is the March equinox point. This is Earth's cardinal east. All right, the tropical zodiac is aligned to Earth's cardinal directions. So we see the planets moving in this counterclockwise fashion along the zodiac, along the ecliptic, and we can see from this picture that, like picture earlier, the moon looks like it's below the sun. It's not really in line, nor is it appearing to be on the ecliptic at all. It's not really married to that yellow line. And there's a lot more to be said about the ecliptic, and it's very hard to sort of condense all of this, but I really wanted to try my best to give sort of a semi-foundational little, I guess, mini lecture within this, because it's sort of hard to talk about one without the other. All of that, just another presentation for another time. But for now, you know, we are looking at the moon, and we might need to bring in some additional symbols here to help us really understand this a little bit better. So we see now symbols that we're familiar with, right? The south node and the north node. The lunar nodes are our eclipse points. And we can see from this visual from Stellarium, there are 2 points where the 2 orbits converge, and there are 2 points where they seem to deviate and separate. So we see Rahu, the north node, the head of the dragon, swallowing the luminaries, and Ketu, the dragon's tail, entwining the current lunar and solar energies with what has been previously consumed, as the Vedic tale of the churning of the milk ocean tells us, bringing both an ominous moment of shadow and silence with the eclipses that they create. And astrologer Brian Clark has written some wonderful things about the nodes. In a Mountain Astrologer article from 2017, he writes, "The engagement with the dragon is an allegory for the times in the individuation process when we wrestle with unsavory sides of the self, parts that we deny or keep secret, but that have an uncanny knack for showing up anyway." So the lunar nodes are in many ways our first introduction to the concept of shadow. And as written by Hermes in the Emerald Tablet, that which is above is like that which is below, and that which is below is like that which is above, to perform the miracles of one only thing. And if we consider for a moment where Cristina began our journey, well, what is your relationship with sun and moon? Sun, spirit, and moon, soul. And what can we glean from this astronomical embrace, these moments where the paths of each intersect, where spirit and soul collide? And where do we find ourselves in all of this? So let's view the whole picture now. And here's our Aries new moon moment again. And I've mapped out the ecliptic and the path of the moon here. And we consider once again this converging of spirit and soul, and the shadows which are cast, as well as the 2 moments in the lunar cycle, which host high moon and low moon. Now, lunar latitude and lunar phase are 2 separate layers of the lunar experience, so they're not mutually exclusive. While the moon spends half of its cycle waxing and half waning, the moon also spends half its zodiacal journey higher than the sun and half lower. So there's this mystical lunar snaking, the moon crossing the north node and ascending up to its northernmost latitude, the north bending, coming back around, crossing the south node and moving south to its southernmost point, the south bending. And this continues, and the moon does in a month what the sun does in a year. And the moon's orbital path is tilted about 5 degrees with respect to the ecliptic. So the moon travels where the sun cannot go. And I wonder if you wouldn't say the same about certain parts of the self, right? Parts of the psyche that you can only tap into with your intuition and your emotional body, surpassing the limitations of identity and ego. So what do the story of the nodes and the bendings, what do they weave the lunar serpent snakes above and below the ecliptic. And what does lunar latitude say of the soul's journey in a chart? And can we compare the nodes and bendings to the equinox and solstice points? These are all things to consider. Due to the apex of the sun's way, our solar system is moving north. A truth which tells us that while the moon crosses the north node, it is moving towards some distant future. And that it most certainly is revisiting what once was whilst it crosses the south node. Now, neither Cristina or I subscribe to the idea that we must rid ourselves of the south node. Rather, there are components to be integrated. And what better way to learn and integrate than to face a challenge? And how about the challenge of squares? Another really profound teaching that the moon and the nodes offer is the magic of squares. And how can we square the circle? Squares across the axes of growth, Taurus and Scorpio now, and squares across Leo and Aquarius. We cannot forget these in-between points. So it's a magical square of fixed signs or cross-quarter points, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. But how can we hold space for both of these polarities during and in between eclipse season? And we'll get into that a little bit later when we're working with the eclipses. So how can this inspire a new layer of contemplation in your cosmology? That's really where I'm at here. You know, my goal is to perhaps leave you with more questions than answers, but to provide you the tools to delineate charts in new and exciting ways, and ways that really tie the practice on the computer and on the screen to the sky and the physical practice, right? We're combining the measurable and the mythical. We're doing very Taurus and Scorpio things here. We're in the mind, we're in what we're feeling and knowing, and we're also outside and we're experiencing it. So it seems appropriate. All right, so where are we right now with all of this? And Robin Heath has a really good quote from his book. It's one of the little wooden books. It's a great series of books. If you have the opportunity to pick them up, I highly suggest it. And he says, repeated cycles such as full moons, eclipses, and planetary conjunctions revealed a cosmology to ancient astronomers, which was both numerical, geometrical, and which imbued creation with order and meaning. Now, we just have a few more Earth-oriented facts to tend to before diving back into the waters of symbol and story. And you can screen grab this slide if you'd like. I'm not going to go through all of these numbers, but we know that because of the 5-degree tilt of the moon's orbit, the moon can be either below or above the sun. And we can see lunar latitude in the chart by drawing squares to the bendings. And we know that the sun must be present at the point of north or south node for an eclipse to occur. But what kind of orb are we talking about for this phenomenon to be possible? So the numbers here will show you right off the bat, kind of, we see how it's more possible or more likely for a lunar eclipse, or I'm sorry, a solar eclipse to occur than a lunar eclipse, right? The orb seems to be much more contained. The sun can be about 18 and a half degrees away from the node, and we can still have a partial eclipse. So we can have total, partial, or slightly partial. And how long will an eclipse last? Well, moon moves about 12 to 14 degrees a day, so short-lived and only visible to certain parts of the Earth based on that primary motion, right? Spinning of Earth on its axis. We look at this diagram below where the new moon is occulting the sun and casting that shadow. You can almost think of these shadows being cast on the landscape as a paintbrush crossing over the topography, right? And that happens over the course of not very long at all. And there are different patterns, different cycles, different families of eclipses. So there's a lot to be said on that. But again, just sort of an introduction to what is possible. So as we've said, we find ourselves today in the midst of eclipses occurring across the polarity of Taurus and Scorpio. Right? So let's dig a little bit deeper into some of those themes.
Thank you so much. That's all just so excellent. And again, here I'll go back if anybody wants to screen grab these really helpful diagrams and demarcations of space and time. I think that is a good idea. And obviously not to like, get too I don't know, meta, but I really just appreciate the way that you're able to bring all of this to our conversation because not that there's anything wrong with not dipping into the astronomical, but it's something that unless you're maybe in a certain circle of astrology practitioners, it doesn't come up all of the time to think about the actual earth and sky of it all. We get really focused on the esoteric or what's on the screen, but this is living astrology that we can observe or try to observe if we step outside and look at the sky at night. So just a reminder to everyone to go look at the moon tonight and be amazed, and remember that there's always this astronomical component to astrology. So again, if anybody tries to debunk or challenge you on the scientific I don't know, weight of astrology, there's a lot here. It's actually pretty massive. So don't ever forget that. All right. So let's think now about the Taurus-Scorpio archetypal kind of balance here, because these are the two signs that have been activated by the North and South node moving through them for, the past chunk of time. And I guess to orient us, eclipses happen in these pairings. And so before our Taurus-Scorpio binary set began, really at the end of last year, we had eclipses in Gemini and Sagittarius. And prior to that, we had eclipses in Cancer and Capricorn. So you can trace it back in that direction. The Leo Aquarius eclipses were prior to that. So the nodes are always moving backwards in terms of their sign orientation, and there is a lot that we can trace through our own charts and our own relationship to our North and South node if we keep all of that in mind. So right at this point, we are in the realm of the North node being in Taurus and the South node being in Scorpio. And here I've just got some pretty basic, but hopefully grounding astrological detail regarding the purview of these two zodiac signs. So we know that Taurus is the second sign of the zodiac. It is a fixed earth sign ruled by Venus. It is depicted by the symbol of the bull, and it really is associated with key terms like values. I think that's the most important word for Taurus. Rigor, foundation, being methodical, and the sensuous. And so both Taurus and Scorpio are oriented towards the sensuous. I believe that Taurus is oriented towards a kind of Venusian sensuousness, whereas Scorpio talks about a more Mars-like sensuality, which we can talk about what that means. But that's how I like to parse this, because they're both oriented towards the body in a really particular way that's special amongst the signs, but they are approaching that from two different vantage points. And so, right, elemental details here. I just listed all those things, but importantly, the moon is exalted in Taurus, right? And so just in terms of the feel of where planets like to be, the moon exalts in Taurus, and in Scorpio, the moon falls. And so I'm not a stickler for Ptolemaic dignity, but I do think about it. And it's interesting to me that, when we're talking about lunations, these are two places where we're kind of thinking about the quality of our astrological energy this year. So anyway, Scorpio is the 8th sign of the zodiac. It's a water sign. It's also a fixed sign, ruled by Mars. Its contemporary ruler may be Pluto. And we think about depth when we're thinking about Scorpio. We're thinking about spiritual values as opposed to physical values or the tangible. Scorpio is about the value of the intangible, the way that our soul walks a different path, perhaps, than the status quo. Very psychologically oriented, also extremely methodical, penetrating and intuitive. These are all Scorpio keywords that I feel very comfortable with. You may have your own set, but this is what I think about when I think about Scorpio. And so really this polarity is about value on either end. They're both very interested in what is important to the soul, to the body, but they're approaching it from different vantage points. Maybe Taurus approaches it from a day world perspective, where we're thinking about our possessions, our homes, our paychecks, and the kind of standards of living that are very seen by other people. Whereas Scorpio doesn't care about any of that at all and likes to remain in the realm of the spiritual or the realm of the soul, thinking about how, consumption or connection really says something about the quality of one's deep buried experiences, or how our buried experiences impact what we're living out in that day world, right? So these are themes, therefore, that the eclipses may be touching on, and we'll kind of keep expanding this moving forward. But just to give you a template of like what's up with Taurus and Scorpio, both of them are oriented toward the question of establishing a set of values, but Taurus from the perspective of the tangible, Scorpio from the realm of the psychological or the soul. And yeah, so Alyssa, what is your take on these things? If you want to add any keywords here, I'd love to hear.
I had actually a recent, like, very, very, like, the experience that I had was very much across this axis, and sort of led me to think about understanding how to better move from our emotional body into our physical body, right? So when we talk about things like embodiment, and I feel like we say that a lot, but to really truly be using all of our senses in a moment where we're not limiting ourselves to what we might be feeling and thinking, and getting lost in those deep realms of the Scorpio pools. And there's also like this sense of trust and security and insecurity that arises as we like move within this polarity, because we have to wonder, I feel like that's a very Scorpio thing to be like, well, why am I here at all? Or what does this even mean? And Taurus is just like, well, I want to enjoy it. And I find myself very often like going between those two extremes, right? Where why don't you go lay in a field, right? That very classic depiction of Taurus, like bull or cow in the grass, and enjoying every moment and eating the sacred fruits and being at peace with everything. And then Scorpio kicks in and we start wondering, well, why are we here? And how are we here? And all these things. And there's this need to sort of balance all that we sort of desire also. When we say desire, we think Mars, but I think we could also think about Venus as well. And how do we sort of arrive where we're, again, holding both and being able to have those moments of peace? And I think Taurus is probably the most at peace in the zodiac, and also be okay with change and growth and transformation, and to not get comfortable, but to be able to find a little bit of contentment in simplicity.
Mhm.
So there's just like a lot of that very back and forth where we have to find that middle path.
I love all of that. And that kind of very beautifully brings me into this list of associations that I wanted to share. Just this idea of being embodied, and what does that even really mean? Like, that word gets thrown around a lot on the spiritual internet or the healing internet. And I think that at its very most basic, this eclipse cycle is giving us an opportunity to kind of really tap into what we are physically experiencing and where that is coming from. And so we're thinking a lot about consumption, about circadian rhythm, about comfort, and maybe like places where we are resisting making better choices for the earth, for ourselves, right? This is all part of the bigger picture. And so that just, I think, really speaks beautifully to like what you were, saying so articulately just about the way that we have to balance comfort and change, and understanding where we're experiencing that in our lives. We'll talk about in a few slides when we talk about finding this in your chart. I also think that there's a lot of stuff going on with money right now that's interesting. And so I'm not like an economics expert, but I do, think about the way that our world, especially here in the US, is so so tied to like the stock market, and the way that we experience reality is very often governed by what that sort of financial sector is reflecting or depicting to us. And so thinking about our dynamics as a collective with our resources and the way that they underpin society in a really crucial way, maybe making breakthroughs with new approaches to money and the economy, reframing that information. With Uranus and Taurus, it's like definitely a kind of weird marker of something new to come our way. I don't know. Is it UBI? I don't know. But there's something interesting that's kind of percolating, and thinking about our relationship to those systems that have been established for a while now is what this eclipse series can also bring to us, because there's a lot of toxicity there, which is what the Scorpio South Node has no patience for anymore. So kind of identifying the abuses of these systems is important right now, as is finding critiques of power that center resources in particular. And so that can be in your political life or in your personal life, right? But again, there's just this heavy emphasis on what we consume and how it impacts our soul. I feel like that's like the tagline for these eclipses in a lot of ways. So yeah, I noticed that we have some stuff going on in the chat and Q&A. Do you want to dip in there before we move on? Alyssa, you feel cool with that?
Yeah, how can we determine what eclipse series are more impactful in our individual lives based on our charts? I think we'll answer that when we move on to the next segment of this.
Absolutely. We're absolutely going to get to that. So thank you for dropping that question in there. We will get there. And then I see someone is describing their own relationship with the nodes. If we could have any guidance about what else to consider. Yeah, so hopefully we cover this when we get to a few slides down the road. And if we don't, feel free to come back and clarify. And then Fred Farella in the chat is saying, any thoughts on potential insights one may find with respect to the location of the shadow of solar eclipse? For example, whether it falls over land versus sea, whether there are frequent locations that repeat more than others, or patterns otherwise. Really interesting question. Alyssa, do you have thoughts about this?
Do you work with astrocartography at
Me?
all?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I have not. I have only really like scratched the surface with it. So maybe you could speak on that a bit.
I mean, the only way that I work with it is like determining appropriate places for a native to maybe relocate or visit. But I would say that, Fred, I am going to look into that. I think that it's a fantastic question.
Yeah.
There may be a pattern to it. The land versus sea thing is very magical, very imaginative. But I don't know if there are frequent locations. I would imagine that there are, because of the orbital nature of the relationship of the sun and the moon. But again, if we're always moving north and there's always a 5-degree sort of difference going on, there may not be like a frequently shadowed place. But in general, I can just say that when we are in the shadow of the eclipse in our physical location, that is sort of cloaking us in this, I would say transformative energy, because the light that we're receiving from one luminary or another is interfered with. And so the way that I like to say it is it's like refracted through a funhouse mirror at that point in time. It's still getting to us down on Earth, but it is kind of bent and warbled. I actually remember, I don't know, people on the East Coast didn't get to catch it as much, but I was on the East Coast for the Leo Aquarius eclipses that we had back in 2018. And I was out on a beach at the moment that the eclipse happened in the daytime, and there was a shadow that kind of dimmed the sun, and it made everything seem so eerie. And I swore that I saw birds flying backwards. Like, I don't know, I was sober, but I was having this moment where I was like, this is incredibly weird, and it felt so quiet. If you'll notice, nature always hushes down if you're ever in the realm of an eclipse. Like, the birds know, the animal life knows that there's something off. So I'm rambling here, but Fred, I'll find a better, more satisfying answer to your question. But on a very energetic level, I do think that it just cloaks us in the energy of the eclipse. So if you're in a place where the eclipse shadow is falling, or you can actually physically see or know that it's happening, visible from your location, I feel like that's a very strong influence for you as a human being at that moment in time. Whereas, if an eclipse is happening, but it's not visible from your location, maybe it's a little bit, I'm not going to say lessened, but it's different. So yeah, this is a very long answer, and we will continue that conversation, Fred. Thank you. So Meg is in the chat, says, I know you touched on this beginning, but could you please remind me why the nodes always move backwards / retrograde? Alyssa, that's for you.
I think that we're actually talking about that next.
Okay, cool. We're doing so great. Okay, so let's see. We have another comment in here. Lots of energy around changes in home. Relationships started during 2013. Very interesting. Oh my God. I don't know if this relationship is fated to end for good, but there is definitely something happening this year, especially since like you can track it to 2013 or 2014, that previous Scorpio Taurus eclipse series. So at the very least, there's a focal point on this relationship at this moment for you. And remember that you have choice. And so, if you want things to end, this could be a powerful moment to try to execute that or enact that. Okay, fab. Let's keep moving. Great questions, though, everyone. So personal eclipse workings, we're going to think now about how to sort of understand what it is that we are looking at in this particular moment. So Alyssa, take it away.
So with the myriad of things to consider, another wondrous astronomical truth to explore, what does this mean for the solar seasons of Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius? Right, astronomy informs our astrology, and to illuminate the astronomical truths of Earth, Sun, and Moon is to really decode a layer of our craft, which often remains very misunderstood. Right, what does this mean for our soul's lunar experience as we move forward? What's the long term here? And I love questions like the ones that were just asked, where we're really seeking to know why. And the truth of it is that there is a lot that is just sort of accepted, right? We accept that the sun rejoices in the fifth house. We accept that the sun and Leo are interconnected. And if we go back, very far back, we can sort of glean the whys, but not all of the whys are very clear, I'll say. So while sun and moon and planets move counterclockwise through the zodiac, right? They move from Aries to Taurus and so on. The lunar nodes move clockwise in a retrograde fashion, transiting each sign in about 18.6 months and transiting the entire wheel in about 18.6 years. And again, this is one of the things that it is accepted. The nodes naturally are retrograde. And I've watched a ton of videos on YouTube of astrophysicists explaining this and, showing it. And it's just sort of, it always begins with, well, the nodes are retrograde. That sort of just is the nature of their relationship. And every 18 months, 18.6 months, they move backwards, quote unquote. And this leads us to now question, well, what is our relationship with things that move backwards? What is our relationship to retrogrades in general, right? And this is another contemplation of shadow, perhaps. What about the precession of the equinoxes or the Mercury elemental triangle? These are things that move backwards. We can also think about what it means to travel from Aries or from Taurus to Aries, right? We're so used to thinking in this sort of one-dimensional way, and we see the circle as one way, and we also use language that insinuates beginnings and endings, beginning in Aries and ending in Pisces. But what does it mean to move from Pisces to Aries? And how can we find a little bit more fluidity, right? And in sacred geometry, we see the circle as oneness. It is wholeness. It is the all. So there really is no beginning or end. So what can you glean from that invitation, right? And what does it mean to learn from Taurus and Scorpio, and then to move towards the polarity of Aries and Libra? How does it feel to move from mutable to fixed to cardinal? And how is that different, right? This is just another layer. We're just continually adding these layers. This also means that each solar cross quarter day of this duration, this period of time where the nodes are in Taurus and Scorpio, and that's as of January 18th of this year until July 25th of 2023, that our solar cross quarter stations are going to host auspicious lunar events. Every time we have a midpoint between equinox and solstice and equinox, we are going to have a point in the lunar journey where the moon is crossing a node or a bending. So a solar eclipse on the day of Beltane, imagine what would an ancient astronomer be thinking? They're gathering around sacred stone sites to observe the sky, and suddenly all goes dark, right? To that same visual that Cristina gave earlier. What would that mean then for the coming weeks or the coming season? So how we work with eclipses is also very reliant on how we are experiencing the sky. And I have two examples here that are chart wheels of the solar eclipse on the 30th and the lunar eclipse on May 16th. So an invitation to meet and to integrate the living sky, right? In our current cosmic realm, we have some very special tools to help us see that which cannot be seen. So here in North America, we won't witness the partial solar eclipse on the 30th. However, the sun will set and the stars of Scorpio will rise. And again, I'm not saying that the constellation of the Scorpion will rise. I'm saying that the stars tethered to 210 degrees of ecliptic longitude to 239 degrees of ecliptic longitude will be crossing the eastern horizon. And you can set your house system to porphyry houses to get the most astronomically correct estimation of the sky. I actually encourage you to toggle between house systems based on the work you're doing. I use whole sign in natal readings. I use porphyry when I'm out and I'm working with the sky itself. They're not exclusive. You don't need to dedicate your life to one. Cristina knows I've had this sort of existential crisis since I started my practice, but we find our way. So we're looking at this, and if you look out at night, you will see the Scorpion, you will see those stars, you will see Antares, the watcher of the West, heart of the Scorpion. You will see those stars with your eyes. You don't need binoculars, you don't need a telescope. And you can use your hands to get acquainted with the South Node, right? Because the South Node is not a body, it is a point. And what we can do is we can use our hands, right, to measure. Okay, you can take your fist, and your closed fist is approximately 10 degrees of ecliptic space. So if you extend your fist at arm's length and you put it up to the sky and you connect it to Antares, to the right of Antares, 2 fist distance is going to introduce you to the realm of Scorpio, to this where the South Node is. Find that point again in mid-May when the moon is there, right? This is going to be a really breathtaking way when you finally meet these points, right? And I made the joke to Cristina that sometimes it feels like we're talking about the planets and we're talking about all these things and what they mean. And it's like having a conversation with someone online. And then one day you meet in person and you're just like, oh, here you are. I'm experiencing you fully for all that you are in front of me. Watch it happen up overhead. And think about the ancient astronomers. Think about why we're doing this in the first place. It's an embodied practice to be out there and to be witnessing it. So follow the moon each night and watch her meet the royal stars, watch her cross the bendings, watch her rise and fall and appear higher and lower, and all of these magical things. So not only are you seeing the current zodiacal realms of these fixed signs while you're out there, you are also seeing your own nativity. So when I go out and I see Taurus in the sky, I'm seeing my 11th house. I'm seeing the whole thing move, and I'm seeing that realm. And regardless of whether or not you have planets there, it is still a house. It is still important. And I think that that's also something that gets misconstrued a lot. I've seen forums and posts with thousands of comments where people are sort of making it seem like because they have nothing in Scorpio, it means less. It does not mean less. It is still ruling over and coloring a part of your experience. So you're not only meeting the transit sky, you're meeting your own sky. And that's something that's really important. This is how we engage and deepen our practice, right? So where the eclipse occurs in your own horoscopos is of great importance. And Cristina is going to talk us through a little bit of more of the how and how we can configure ourselves to that orientation.
Thank you. And yeah, I just absolutely love that trick of like your closed fist being 10 degrees of zodiacal space approximately. I'm definitely going to play with that when I look at the sky. And there are really good like apps, free apps that you can get to orient yourself to the sky. Like I think that there's one called like Night Sky or Night Walk, which you can like hold your smartphone up to the sky and check to see what is that star. It looks like something. It's kind of red. Oh, it's Antares, right? It's the Watcher. So yeah, play with that too. I think that that's really important and good to know what we're looking for. So just to kind of, take us into the particulars of what it is we're actually experiencing this eclipse cycle, right? We've talked a lot about the transformational or the thematic like meaning of these eclipses from a general point of view. But I want you now to take your natal chart, right? And doesn't matter what house system you use, like Alyssa says. I also toggle back and forth between whole sign and Placidus depending on my client's needs or preferences, and very interested in the porphyry for astronomical work idea. So thanks for that. But yeah, anyway, it doesn't matter. I want you to look at your natal chart and find the place where Taurus and Scorpio are hanging out in this binary oppositional way, right? We were talking all about the way that the two signs oppose each other, but are part of a pair a few slides back. Now, literally on your chart, we can see that this constellation or the space of Taurus, right? Really the space of Taurus and the space of Scorpio are opposing spaces on the wheel. This is where the south node is in Scorpio and the north node is in Taurus. And so this is where in your own chart, you are going to be lit up for these eclipses and really for the next like year. And so to kind of further that, the houses of the natal chart are thematically the same for us all, but have a different sort of feeling depending on what signs are coloring the houses that we have in our natal chart. And so if you are an Aries rising, you are going to be thinking this, lunar or this eclipse cycle about the second house where Taurus would be and the eighth house where Scorpio would be. If you're Scorpio rising, you are going to be thinking about the seventh house where Taurus would be and the first house where Scorpio would be. So it's different for everyone depending on your rising sign. And you can look here and feel free to, screen grab this as well. This is my wheel, very, very basic house definitions, but a good start. As to how the themes are going to be impacting you personally. Are these themes of resources and the soul going to be lighting up your axis of embodiment, like health and subconscious? Are they going to be lighting up your axis of intuition and origin versus your public image? Right? And so thinking about this is how we get specific. What I would also advise you to do is look to your own natal chart and see where Venus and Mars are, because those are the rulers of the North and South node, and they might be a little bit extra lit up at this point in time. So that's another trick that we can use to see what's going on in the chart for you personally. To determine if it's like an extra important set of eclipses for you, do you have a lot of placements in Taurus and Scorpio, or one or the other? Do you have your North or South node in Taurus or Scorpio, or Leo and Aquarius? Because that would be the squared axis to the current nodal axis. Do you have a lot of, do you have a very prominent Venus in your chart? Do you have a very prominent Mars? These are things to think about when understanding what's going on for you in relationship to your own eclipse experiences, right? So which two houses are being lit up? Reflect on the quality of life events from 2013 to 14, which is the last time the nodes were in Taurus and Scorpio. What's changed and what is coming up again? And then how can you surrender to these themes more fully? And so that kind of brings me to my final note here, which is that during eclipses, we are not meant to mess with the energy of the sky. During other lunar events or other astrological events, we can maybe hold ritual to try to draw down the power of the sky, or try to like manifest or get things, or you start things or end things. We can work with the lunar energy, the solar-lunar energy. But during eclipses, right, we're bringing us all the way back to the beginning, where we're thinking about that light being tampered with or interfered with. We don't have the opportunity to work with eclipses in that same way. We are meant to experience a kind of surrender. So you can light candles, but light white candles and just chill. Take a bath, take a salt bath, salt scrub if you have a shower, not a tub. Do things that are neutralizing, cleansing, and grounding. And remember that you are here to observe what the eclipses are bringing to your attention, rather than forcing something to kind of come to fruition, right? So if it's meant to find you, it will, and it definitely will during eclipse season or in this really fated cycle. And so that's my kind of stern, like Capricorn rising note about this. Like, don't try to push it. It will come to you, and we don't need to mess with the magic that's already on its way. So I'm looking at the chat. I see the chat's popping off here. So let's see what's going on. South node on top of my Uranus. Yeah. South node on your Uranus is like, a kind of highlighted experience, I would say, of what kind of tools you use to move yourself forward and how you innovate. So maybe you're feeling really innovative, or maybe you're feeling less so. Either way, it's highlighted at this point in time. Jessica says, I've just had a nodal return. Yeah. South node at 27 Scorpio. That's really important. So this is an important moment for you. I like to think about the nodal returns as like a little cosmic checkpoint where we're moving through a kind of gateway. And it's like, yep, I've made another cycle and I get to shed some snake skin a little bit. So Nicolette asks, what does it mean if my chart, in my chart, it's Taurus, South node, Scorpio, North node? It's a great question. So Nicolette, you are going through your nodal inversion right now, which is just a part of the nodal cycle where your North and South node are just in the opposite. They happen to be being opposed by the transiting north and south node. And so this is kind of known, I would say, maybe Alyssa has a thought about this, as a time of, again, like breaking free. Usually we're kind of breaking free from a foundation or a structure that we've built. Sometimes things can radically change. I've seen people break up, get divorced, move across the country, change their career depending on how it's activated in their chart. So it's just a kind of heightened moment. Alyssa, do you have nodal inversion thoughts of your own?
I feel like I like to think of them also like sort of isolated and seeing like the opposition of that, and just knowing that whatever your north node experiences is being opposed by the south node and then vice versa. And just like implementing some of the same full moon sort of verbiage as well into that experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. I totally agree. Jessica says 12th house, which opposes my Chiron in the 7th. I have 7 planets in Scorpio. Any thoughts? Yeah, I would say any thoughts. It's so hard to do off the top of your head, but basically, like, I would try to drop in really deeply with those Scorpio planets and kind of ask them what they need from you in order to feel healthy, grounded, and supported. Scorpio at this moment is really going through it. And so if you have a lot of Scorpio in your chart, or if you are Scorpio rising, whatever, nurture and questioning what you actually need is the name of the game right now. So it's really important. Okay. Oh, buying a house in the eclipses, and I'm worried, as I was told not to start things. Listen, literally, again, we have to work with what we're given. The housing market is absolutely wild. If you are having the opportunity to buy something right now, it's okay. It's really okay. Just keep track of your paperwork. Make sure that you have all the information up front. Don't skip any of your inspections. Like, make sure everything is the way it should be. But we can't not live our lives because astrology is happening, and I feel very firmly about that. So don't worry. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Okay. Looking in, do you see current Uranus transiting Taurus as having significant influence during the eclipses? Yeah. Alyssa, do you want to speak to that? Because I'm like chatting a lot over here.
We had a bunch of notes where we wanted to really bring in some of the planetary aspects, but we really wanted to sort of close that aperture lens and zoom in on some of the more basics, but definitely important to note Uranus with the North Node. And I think it's like the end of June through the early October. So there is going to be a really prominent energetic force, at work there, in addition to Saturn square the nodes, which is basically ongoing for the majority of this year. So maybe we will sort of send out or shoot out another like short mini thing where we maybe discuss that a little bit in the future.
I like that. That's a great idea. Yeah. I think that I also see, like, Uranus has been in Taurus for a few years now, and it's been kind of bringing like this instability of our resources to our attention. We are hearing a lot about climate, hearing a lot about, again, like the instability of our financial institutions, our systems that we govern resources through. And I just see like the eclipses contacting Uranus in Taurus as just, it's a focal point or a spotlight. And so that conversation gets louder and we see more. I mean, thinking about what is it called? Like the gaps in the production of like food and machinery that we need, right? All of these, like, what is it called? The chain, my mind. Also, what is it? The
Daisy
I don't
chain?
know. No, whatever. Just everything is falling apart basically. And it is a way of thinking about the supply chain. Thank you, everyone. The supply chain. So disruptions to that really, really, I think, are Uranus and Taurus with the nodes. So yeah, wow. I know so many words, but I could not remember any of that.
Yeah, I think it's also like important not to fall victim to anyone that might be trying to like villainize any of the outer planets, which sometimes happens. especially with Uranus, I feel like sometimes there's a little weirdness there, and it can be very useful. I actually waited until a very particular moment in Uranus retrogrades period where it was aspecting my own chart to quit my job. So there are like very, the full spectrum, as we've said, like things can seem bad and be useful. Things can seem very, lucky or opportune, and we still need to be cautious. So, again, like Cristina said, like free will, and, we're not limited. We're not like contained to these like very specific parameters. So yes, buy your house, do your thing, fall in love, whatever it is, and just, just be mindful if it, of what might be influencing that. That's all.
I totally agree. All right, so I'm going to just keep moving through the questions quickly here because I want to hold space for our closing meditation. And let's see. So do you have any favorite apps or software you use for mapping out charts? My favorite free software has always been astro.com. They have so many free tools. It's amazing. You can get super, super far, and they let you save 100 charts, like if you make an account for free. So definitely astro.com. AstroSeek is also really good, and they have a lot of fancy like calculators for really specific niche astro questions. So that's a good one. Time passages is totally good. You can get that on mobile as well. And I think that those are three really good ones. And then it seems like Alyssa and I both use Astro Gold as our paid software. And like, I feel like it's okay. I'm not in love with it. The other fancy one is Solar Fire, but you need a PC for that, and I have a Mac. So we are here in Astro Gold land, which I have feelings about. But yeah, so that's there. Is there any value in looking at progressed or solar return or arc charts for eclipses? I would say that if you're noticing that in your progressed chart and in your solar return chart, there's an eclipse, conjuncting an axis like your AC/DC or your midheaven IC axis, that's valuable for sure. Right? Would you say so, Alyssa? Yeah. Okay. Any advice for dating during starting a relationship during eclipse season? Again, live your life. Just be mindful. I think that it's not the same thing where people during retrogrades like, oh, you'll have to start over again, during the next period. You might meet your soulmate during an eclipse, right? Eclipses are fated moments. And so you might be pushed towards something really sweet. Or maybe it's a fated moment about learning about your own needs during eclipse season for dating. So that's there. All right, everyone's telling me supply chain. Okay, cool. We're good. Okay. So I'm going to transition us out of Mercury mode, as I like to call it. And we're going to kind of spiral in towards the center, and I'm going to let Alyssa lead us through just a grounding, guided meditation. So everybody, if you want to get comfy, grab a pillow, whatever you like to use, and we will be moving into that realm. And then afterwards, just our closing remarks. So yeah, thank you, Alyssa, for this.
I also want to add, if you've been sitting this entire time, you're not on video, so be weird, move around, maybe stand up, maybe squat, forward fold, twist. If you've been sitting on the floor, if your legs are cross-legged, definitely swap the legs, whatever you need to do. I think it's always better to just bring a little motion in before we sort of dedicate to like a static moment. So do whatever you need. Or if you want to lay down, go for it. Whatever you need to do to be completely comfortable. That's always the goal with any kind of breath work or meditation. And I'm realizing the sun is like setting, so I'm probably glowing over.
You are. It's beautiful.
Okay. So once you're comfortable and sort of shake it all out, let's come to sit or lie down. And close the eyes gently and relax the face. We say this a lot in yoga, relax the tongue and the roof of the mouth, and sort of rush through that. But with this focus on Taurus and the season which we've just entered, let's give ourselves some time. Allow yourself to really feel that experience. What does it feel like to relax your tongue? Right? The tongue is at ease. It's not pressing against the roof of the mouth. It's not pressing against the teeth. It simply is floating. Feel the center of your forehead. Let your shoulders be heavy, your arms hanging like drapes along either side of the body, and maybe you wiggle your elbows to reinforce that. Think about what you hear. There are birds outside your window, people talking in the distance, other animals, other sounds. Think about anything that you might be smelling. Is someone cooking a meal? Is there incense filling the room? Can you smell a breeze coming in through an open window? Really think about what your clothes feel on your body. Socks you might be wearing, fabric against your skin. And just sort of surrender to all of your senses. Allowing yourself to focus. So we're not trying to eliminate the thoughts or silence the mind. We're actually trying to really connect to everything around us. And we're breathing naturally. The breath is not forced. We're not making any point to manipulate it. Just let it come naturally with steadiness and ease. Maybe that's in through the nose and out through the nose, or in through the mouth and out through the mouth, or a combination of the two. Think about your spine. Maybe sit a bit more upright. Maybe let the chin sort of drop down towards the chest, relaxing the back of the neck. Let the fingers rest on the lap. Maybe they curl in towards the palm. And the entire body is relaxed. And if you struggle for any reason, or there's any resistance in the physical body, use an affirmation and just maybe proclaim, I am allowed to relax. And just begin very slowly counting your breath. And we all have our own internal rhythm, sort of a metronome. And watch your breath. Maybe your count is in for 1, 2, 3, out, 2, 3. Maybe your 3 is a bit longer than mine, or maybe your 3 becomes 4 or 5. Just let it be whatever supports you to breathe with steadiness and ease. Nothing forced. Detaching from whatever experience you were having before this moment, detaching from any expectations of what will happen after this moment. And as you breathe, imagine your body and your mind floating in a cloud of fog or smoke or light or lace or whatever comes to mind, forgetting what the room around you looks like. You are no longer there. Even though it might be bright where you are, just visualize that everything around you becomes vast space, full of stars, maybe asteroids or comets going by in the distance. And if you look down below your seat, you realize that you are floating atop the moon. And as you breathe in, the moon travels along its orbit, rising up from the north node to the north bending. And as you exhale, you come back around, passing the south node, arriving at the south bending. And you breathe in, and the moon continues around. Let's take a breath together to tether ourselves to this orbit and this path, breathing in deeply through the nose, sighing it out through the mouth. So as you breathe, you're moving upwards and downwards. And I want you to visualize that every time you inhale and you move upwards and you cross the north node, you're able to see, no matter how far away it might be, all of your goals, your ambitions, dreams, desires. And as you come back around and you exhale, review where you've been, where you've come from, everything that has made you into who you are. No regrets, no disappointment there. Only lessons. And we breathe in with excitement and ambition as we rise up to the north bending. And we exhale, and with compassion, we revisit and remember all that once was. Know that you are complete in this way. Nothing incorrect, nothing to want or need in this moment. And I invite you to now begin extending your exhalation just a bit longer than your inhalation. So maybe you breathe in for 1, 2, 3, and breathe out for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Adjust as you need. But notice what that feels like to extend the exhalation. And in this way, this is a practice of long enough breathing. We ground ourselves. The nervous system relaxes. We find a bit of solace in a very chaotic and busy day, perhaps something you can return to whenever needed. And everything that you've been visualizing slowly begins to fade around you, and the stars dim. And maybe you begin to visualize behind your closed eyelids what the room that you're sitting in does look like. Reconnect to your senses, what you were able to hear, smell, feel, maybe even taste. And think about what this inspires in the deepest well of your heart, the deepest well of your psychic experience, knowing that the two are connected, never one without the other. We'll take another deep breath together, breathing in through the nose, this time pausing at the top of the inhalation and releasing it through the mouth. Feel free to do that once or twice more. Bowing the chin down towards the chest. I invite you to clasp your fingertips, resting your hands behind your head, bringing some weight to the head, really opening the back of the neck. We've been looking at screens for quite some time. And then simply release the hands, remaining in this internal space. And there's a lot to say about Taurus and Scorpio, where we move between the internal and the external. Find your natural breath. Take your time, flutter your eyelids back open to the room around you. Maybe a bit more aware of your surroundings. Remembering that ride along the moon, along the path of the moon, crossing the nodes and the bendings. Knowing that these cycles are natural and eternal. And that you can come back to that long in a breath, however often you need to, for a little bit of grounding during eclipse season. Thank you guys for that. I needed that.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we did a lot of air work for the past almost 2 hours. So that was really beautiful. And I always love your guided meditations. They're really wonderful. So yeah, should share them with us more. Thank you. Okay, everyone. So here's our final slide. And just to say thank you for being here. And I think that, my goal was to really, our goal together was to be able to provide some educational insight, some magical insight, and just kind of get us ready for the eclipses, which will begin in earnest at the end of this week. But everything this week already is kind of bathed in the light of the eclipsing lunar bodies or solar lunar bodies. So thank you, for kind of diving in with us. And I hope that our words here have been useful and are good guidance for what is to come. If you are interested or if you feel called, Alyssa and I just wanted to offer a thank you gift. I am using the code nodal to offer 10% off any 30-minute session with me for the next month. So you can book that at CristinaFarella.com/booking. And then Alyssa, who makes exquisite candles and ritual objects like incense blends and just other tools for ritual work, is offering 13% off all of her wares through May 31st, and that's inthemoonden.com. I also have my class on Chiron in astrology and myth coming up in May. And so I'll be sending out a link to book if you are interested in going on a 3-week journey with me to learn about that point in the chart as a way of illuminating your own healing path. And I'm really excited to be reoffering that class. So keep an eye out for that. Alyssa, would you like to say anything as we're winding down?
I guess just really endless thank yous for everyone who was here live with us, to everyone who is watching this recorded else at another time and place. This was really incredible to sort of see how we can marry all of these cosmologies, all of these methods, and how really they all bring us to just greater understanding of self and everything that we're doing. So always a wonderful opportunity. And I thank you for having me. I'm glad we got to finally sort of collide ourselves. And it was a really wonderful time.
Yeah, it was super fun. So thank you, Alyssa. And thank you so much, everyone, for being here. The replay will be sent out by email later this afternoon with a little follow-up note. And yeah, take good care. And thanks again. Bye. And thank you to everyone in the chat. You're all angels. Okay. Talk to you later. Bye.
Bye.